It came out of a clear blue sky on a mild fall morning in Manhattan. At first, no one knew what had happened. Could it have been an accident? Surely, nobody would fly into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center on purpose. But as soon as the cameras were set up, they caught the full, startling reality of what was going on. In slow motion, you can see a Boeing 767, a passenger plane, crashing into the South Tower.
We heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
It is hard to imagine what was going through the minds of people on the ground, suddenly vulnerable on the American mainland. President Bush was visiting a school in Florida.
I've ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
But it wasn't over, not by a long way. Almost as soon as the president had finished speaking, another airliner crashed on the Pentagon, the headquarters of the American Defense Department, causing panic in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. The White House was evacuated, and there was a car bomb attack on the State Department, which runs American foreign policy. Back in New York, firefighters went to the basement of the World Trade Center, wondering if the building above them was safe. But the nightmare went on, and it was all live on American television. First, one of the Twin Towers collapsed.
Thanks very much.
Completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
That's the southern tower you're talking about?
Exactly. The second building that we witnessed the airplane enter.
The emergency services had cleared an area around the towers, but they'd not yet succeeded in evacuating the building. The people still inside had seen the other tower go and waved in desperation. Some couldn't wait to be rescued and jumped, although still 100 stories from the ground. But then the second tower collapsed. BBC correspondent Stephen Evans had run from the World Trade Center.
People were just standing around, talking to each other, nodding their heads.
Oh my God. We gotta go.
Right, sorry, it's going down. It's going down. Don't worry, it's going down. It's going
okay
down.
from here.
But you need to shoot, so it's not like a
And then the World Trade Center, proud symbol that it was of the wealthiest city in the world, was no more. At that time of the morning, there would have been about 10,000 people in each tower of the World Trade Center and thousands more in the Wall Street financial district around it. The emergency services have been doing what they can all day, but they are overwhelmed by demand in an atmosphere of terror. Every airliner in the air across America was ordered to land at the nearest airport. A plane crashed in Pittsburgh. As smoke blew across Capitol Hill, the heart of American democracy, it is clear that this is the biggest attack on America since Pearl Harbor.
Once again, we see terrorism, we see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose. They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy. They cannot destroy our society. They cannot destroy our belief in the democratic way.
This is what's left of the World Trade Center. It looks like a battlefield, and it is, but in a war which America cannot fight with the weapons they have. In a brief break in the day, firefighters could embrace each other, but it will be many hours before their work is done, and many years before the full story of what this day means is told.
Now with me here, and I'll be talking to them in a moment, Professor Gallia, who's an expert in fire safety and knows about how the time it takes to evacuate a building like that, and David Learmont of Flight International. But I want, first of all, to go to the BBC's New York business correspondent, Paddy O'Connell, who was there today. Where were you when this happened, Paddy?
Personally, I was in the subway. There's an economic conference on at the World Trade Center that we were attending. In a moment, more from my colleague Steve Evans, who you saw briefly there, who was in the Trade Center when it happened. I was on the subway and my whole morning was spent with people trying to get away from the scene.
Did you hear anything at the time? Did you know anything was happening?
Yes, it was just as the skyline has been altered, it became clear that this is a city whose lifestyle is being altered as we speak. The transportation system ground to a halt. Phone calls were useless. You couldn't use cell phones. I went into a shop to try and use their phone. There was a line of people trying to use it. Then the line went dead. Then, as the whole impression of what had happened spread by word of mouth at this stage, street by street, as you headed north away from the World Trade Center, the streets were shut down. Therefore, more and more people were hearing by mouth and then gathering behind me in Times Square in the conventional New York through history, the way to learn news, although this time about an attack on their own city and elsewhere. And we'll bring you in a moment, David, some of what they were telling us. But first, the full impact was seen in the moment in time. My colleague Stephen Evans, who was in the Trade Center and was interviewed just after the first explosion.
There was another big explosion in the other tower. Flames coming out in this billowing grey smoke. People still not panicking. People not quite understanding what was going on. Then somebody said that they saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, I don't know, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that. The thing that strikes me is, one, the terribleness of the incident, whatever the cause, and we don't go into politics, but whatever the cause, the terribleness, the hugeness of what's happened. So huge, in fact, that most of the people around simply can't understand what happened. People were just standing around, talking to each other, nodding their heads.
Oh my God. We gotta go. Oh my God.
These pictures then of the immediate aftermath. David, behind me in Times Square, phalanxes of people all day, tourists and people headed north, remember, trying to get away, to get home, and at the moment they're stranded. They were speaking to us, giving their reaction on what had happened in their city.
I'm glad to be alive. I mean, there was a total stampede of people. I fell a couple of times, got, slightly trampled, but I walked away with just a scratched knee. So I'm just trying to get home right now to be with my family.
Were you working downtown? Is that what?
Yes, I work on Wall Street, 14 Wall Street, and the devastation is unbelievable. And I'm quite sure that the loss of life is enormous.
It's a very densely packed area down there. Were you with people you knew? Did you lose people at the moment you can't find? Get in touch
currently,
with?
right now, there is a friend of mine that worked in the second tower, and I tried to call her this morning when I heard about the first plane crashing into the building, and I have not been able to reach her.
We still don't know the magnitude of it, and it's just horrible.
Do you live and work in the city?
I work in the city.
What's your day been like?
It's chaotic. Everyone fleeing from downtown, getting as far away from the chaos as possible, and not knowing what's going to happen next. Just horrible.
Where did you go first? Where were you when it happened?
I was in Midtown, and I walked towards Central Park with hundreds of other people just going away from the chaos of Wall Street.
We're in shock. I mean, the enormity of it and the the significance of it hasn't filtered through yet, I don't think. But everyone's walking along. I mean, I walked up from 25th Street up Broadway, and people are walking around in shock, literally.
Do you think it's going to be long for that to turn to anger among people?
No, I don't, actually. I think that reaction will happen pretty quickly.
This is like Pearl Harbor. This is like an act of war. And I think that whatever retribution they can, I mean, I'm eye for an eye, you know, and all that, but something's got to be done. You know, we can't live like this. I mean, this is the capital of the world. More business is done here between 60th Street and downtown Manhattan than any place else in the world. The whole world is responsible for this area here.
I checked on every single person I know. The co-worker I work with, she was very distressed. Her boyfriend she works on the 92nd floor, and she hasn't heard from him ever since. And we've been talking for like about 4 hours, trying to get in contact, and she hasn't seen him. She hasn't heard from him. So other than that, my family's good, but I don't know how she's going to do.
It's unbelievable. Got to work, I thought it was a normal, every other kind of day, and then everything changed. My life will never be the same, even though I had nobody, you know, personally involved in what's happened today. I don't think things can ever go back to the way they were. So I'm...
Stephen Evans, we're hearing there people saying things will never be the same and talking about the sense of shock. How do you think things will change for New York?
It's very difficult to say. That thing happened, what is it, something like 7 hours ago, and it's still not real to me. It simply isn't real. People were wandering away, not being able to believe what had happened. You do change in strange ways. If you see people looking up into the sky, you suddenly get a frisson of fear. So that kind of fear is rippling through all those people who are there. And remember, 50,000 people work in those buildings. It was something like 9:15 in the morning. In the commercial capital of the world, you don't get times more busy than that. So I think an awful lot of people would have gone away from that thing and simply thought and ruminated about it. And that sort of shock takes time to come to you and then to get over it.
And is there any news about the number of dead, or indeed whether there are people injured and being taken out of the rubble of those towers that collapsed?
Not news that I've got. Obviously, you've just got to look at those pictures and realise that something very major has happened. One of the things that struck me was that people didn't move away immediately. People moved, if you like, I don't know, 100 metres away, but there were then explosions later. I noticed about an hour later, for example, in the street where I was, there were about 100 ambulances queuing up to get into the building. The emergency services were thick on the ground very, very quickly, but there was that second explosion and the collapse of the building. I'm not sure that the emergency services quite realised what was about to happen. There was a cloud of smoke. I don't quite know what the impact of that would have been.
And what was the...
You don't imagine that an airliner is going to crash into a building like that. Nobody quite knew what the engineering implications were. My suspicion is that there were casualties way after the initial impact.
And what was the mood actually in the street? We saw you as that building collapsed. Did people panic after that, or were they just aghast and standing watching?
It was genuinely very impressive. Clearly people were panicking, people were shocked, and you could see tears in their eyes and you could hear the shaking in their voices. But I didn't hear many people screaming, and I didn't hear anybody clambering to get over anybody else, if you like. I was evacuated from a hotel about 200 meters from the thing about an hour after the initial blast. There was a disabled lady trying to get downstairs. She was being very, very slow, and people were saying, hold on a minute, I'll help you down. So there was something uplifting, really, in the aftermath of all that.
Steve, thanks very much. We may have a chance to talk to you later about some of the other implications and the implications on the American economy, the world economy of what happened. But I'm joined now by Professor Galea, who's an expert in fire safety, and the specific thing I wanted to ask you about, because I know you've studied the time when the world
expect them to get up and leave. A lot of people would have been wondering what was going on, getting onto the phone, looking out windows, trying to find out what was going on. Again, going back to the experience in the 93 incident. .757. The other aspect of this, the 4 aeroplanes that were hijacked and used for these attacks, 4 American airline flights destroyed,
with all their passengers, with the flight attendants, with the pilots. 2 of them were American Airlines. Flight 11, a Boeing 767 with 81 passengers, which crashed at first into the World Trade Center. Another, Flight 77, a Boeing 757 from Dulles Airport near Washington on its way to Los Angeles, which crashed into the second World Trade Center tower with 58 passengers on board. And then a United Airlines Flight 175, which was bound from Boston to Los Angeles, carrying 56 passengers. That was the one that crashed into the Pentagon building. And then the United Airlines Flight 93, a Boeing 757, which crashed southeast of Pittsburgh while en route from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco with 38 passengers on board. Now, I'm joined here by David Learmont of Flight International and by Chris Hodgkinson, who's an airline pilot. One can only imagine the horror of what went on in those planes. A lot of speculation has been that the people who hijacked them actually took over the controls of the plane and flew them into these towers. Do you agree with that?
I would go along with the fact that they probably, the people who hijacked the aircraft may well have been those who aimed the aircraft at the buildings. But remember, we've never seen hijacks like this before, and the pilots will not have been ready for anything remotely like this. The hijackers may have acted to start with like ordinary hijackers and used the pilots to navigate them to, let's say, take me to New York. As you recall, one of the flights took off from Boston and ended up hitting the towers in New York. So they may well have pretended to be ordinary hijackers who wanted a destination. Then, when they got there, it would have been easy to have disposed of the pilots, you know, got them, either shot them, or whatever weaponry. We don't have any idea of what weaponry these people had to threaten the pilots with, so we don't know exactly what the pilots underwent. But controls are sufficiently intuitive that even a relatively untrained person, if their only task was to aim at something and hit it, they could probably have done that.
Chris Hodgkinson, would the people controlling these flights, after all, we're talking about an area which probably has more flights in it than any other part of the world almost, except for the surrounds of Heathrow, would they have known what was going on, had any inkling of what was happening, or would these be planes that just disappeared from their control?
That, I'm sure, remains a matter of conjecture at this stage. What the air traffickers thought, I'm sure, will come out in the inquiry, but I have no indication at this stage as to what
are pilots trained to do in circumstances like this?
The training that a pilot is given is basically to use his common sense. It's extremely difficult to control security once people are on the aircraft. Someone made a comment to me earlier this evening. Aircraft security stops at the aircraft side, and I would suggest that for the vast majority of airliners in the world, that is the case. You then have to judge the situation, the captain has to judge the situation as he finds it, and act accordingly.
But are you critical of the security controls in the United States? Because you think that could have happened from Heathrow or from any European airport?
Security is very good generally. Around the world there are one or two places which is not quite so good, but I would suggest to you that if a determined effort was made, it is practically impossible to stop it, sadly.
David Emma, do you agree with that? That an unarmed gang of hijackers can get on any plane anywhere in the world?
It is absolutely staggering that 4 hijacks should be able to take place in America all at the same time, all coordinated. Now, there's a great anomaly with American security. In President Clinton's first term of office, he actually set up a commission under Vice President Gore to study the needs for aviation security in America. And this, the report suggested a major ramping up of aviation security throughout throughout America, domestic America, and internationally. Now, it was fully implemented for their international flights, but the airlines who operate domestically protested that it would slow the system down too much. So the government listened to them and did not ramp up security internally. And all these flights, it is not an accident that all these flights were domestic flights. That was America's weakest point, and the terrorists knew this.
And they just didn't take the threat seriously in the United States.
I'm not saying there's no security on domestic flights in the USA. That's not right. You will have your bag x-rayed, etc. But you've no idea the difference between domestic air travel in America and domestic air travel in this country or in Europe. It's much more a sausage machine over there. Everything is processed very much faster, very much more peremptorily. The aircraft are turned round very much faster. The whole thing is geared to speed. It's much more for an American who travels regularly domestically like getting on board a bus. It is an everyday occurrence.
So it would have been much harder to have done this kind of thing in Europe
than in the
United States, is your opinion?
It's not impossible to do this anywhere. I don't think it was an accident that they didn't try to do this with an American international flight, because security on American flights internationally is very good. And certainly security even for domestic flights in Europe is a lot better than it is on domestic flights in the USA, and this is now going to change forever.